Hello, hello, this is Kev Ryan, and I'm still excited about Horizon Wars Zero Dark, so I'm going to keep making mission reports for it. Just to keep you in the loop, Horizon Wars Zero Dark is a miniatures agnostic, sci-fi, skirmish scale, in my case, solo miniatures game, which I've been really enjoying. It has some really interesting mechanics that present a tactical challenge and feel reminiscent of Infinity in a lot of ways, while still being a solo game that has a really fun way of having an interesting opposition. Solo games are fitting my lifestyle and availability right now, which is why I've been looking at them, but it has been really great to be doing this with miniatures, especially since I've been playing less Infinity. Currently, I am playing through Operation Gemini, which is a 3 or 4 mission campaign that comes in the base book. There is a story to it, although I won't talk too much about that right now because I haven't talked about the setting of Horizon Wars at all. And there's the implication that you're going to use the same characters, they might even get a little bit of experience, and improve a little bit, all of which I'll talk about. But today, Mission 1, Data Grab. Basically, our mission here is that there is going to be a objective in the center, the bad guys are going to be deployed around it, we have to go in, grab the objective. Once the objective has been grabbed, we will learn which table edge we have to exit on, and then of course we have to exit off that table edge. We will get bonus experience for whoever leaves the table with the objective, and we will be playing with a restricted entry, which basically means we have to start in a corner of the map. As previously, I will be playing using the Infinity the Game Tabletop Simulator mod. This is because I have a lot of experience with this mod. The maps on it are absolutely beautiful. I think this one was made by Vol SC, and of course I love getting to use the 3D Infinity miniatures. That said, when I play, for myself rather than for making battle reports, I actually do play at home. And what I'm going to try to capture here is something like what I would do if I were playing on my home table. The first thing I would do for the mission is set up a table, which you can see I've done here. Well, technically I've chosen one. And actually, when I play, I often play on a 2-foot by 4-foot map, because then I can use only one of my fold-out tables, which are 2-foot by 4-foot, instead of having to put 2 of them together. And I find that's easier to, set up and take down and move around. So on this map, what I've done with the white lines is I have marked out a 2-foot by 4-foot section, which I will be playing on. Now, because I'm on Tabletop Simulator, I won't hold myself to this too strictly in future videos, but it's where I'm starting off. The next thing that I would do for a campaign is choose the characters that I'm playing with. And my approach for this is to look at the rules for the game and how that fits together, and then look at the miniatures that I have and try to envision fun miniatures that I could use in sort of a, not exactly what you see is what you get fashion, but also not like too distant from that. In this case, I have chosen to do 3-9-3. What that means is I have 3 characters with 9 total upgrades and a maximum of 3 upgrades per character. I think the base game kind of assumes that you're going to be playing with 4 characters, but I find that it's just easier for me to manage 3 of them. It makes things a little more brittle, especially if somebody gets wiped out, but, that's part of the fun. If I lose hard, I can just play again, so it's not that big of a deal to me. And in this case, I thought it'd be fun to use these 3 largely Ariadne models in order to represent mercenaries working for one of the high-tech factions in Horizon Wars Zero Dark. Hero 1 is going to be Cap. That's his call sign. He is a leader because I think every squad or every group needs a leader, but also he's got a combat shield, which you can see there, and I've made him stealthy. The idea with this guy is that he can kind of creep around stealthily. I like the stealth rule, and his combat shield means that he can use his armor even if he is in combat. I think it says cylinder 4 there. Obviously, he's not cylinder 4. Don't worry about that stat too much. But for the rest, he does have a fairly decent balance of move, fight. He's got more discipline than everything else, and his acuity is really low because he just doesn't need that. Next up on the right-hand side is Recon. Recon is obviously on a motorcycle. I've made his movement speed really fast. His fight is particularly low because he won't be using fight all that often. His acuity is 4. I need somebody to have high acuity, and his discipline is 3. His kit is motorcycle, a target designator, and a relay. The motorcycle is from Operation Nemesis. It actually doesn't make you faster. Instead, what it lets you do is take an urgent move, which is the fastest type of move, without getting stunned. Normally, if you do an urgent move, you get stunned, or maybe it's stressed. I can't keep those 2 things straight. But with a motorcycle, you can do that triple move without getting stunned. However, it does mean that you are bigger and you are going to be unable to cautious move. which kind of makes sense because your motorcycle is really noisy. The target designator is basically just a heat light visor, where I've actually removed some of the other advantages of a heat light visor. What this will let me do is it will let me use acuity in order to target people as part of a shoot action or in lieu of a shoot action. So the idea of recon is that he's going to get up close and he can target people with the target designator using acuity. The idea is that that'll make this guy kind of like a forward observer. The heat light visor does have some other properties. I will not be using those other properties, however. The last piece of kit is the relay, which is something that partners with someone else's relay visor, so I'll talk about that when I get there. In summary, this guy's going to be really fast. I have it in my head that he'll rush in and be the objective grabber, and he'll have the acuity that we need in order to do things like doctor people in case we need that too. Last then is this one, who has the missile launcher. Her primary skill here is that her weapon has the indirect fire option, which means that if someone is targeted, or if she can see them through some other fashion, more on that later, she can shoot a missile at them. And because this will let her shoot missiles at people who are targeted, I have chosen to name her Nomad. This is a small Infinity joke where the Nomads are known for their guided missiles. She's also going to be our primary fighter in this case, so I've made her fight score as high as possible, her move is decent, her discipline is decent, and her acuity is fairly low. In retrospect, this does mean that I have only one person with good acuity, which will hurt me later on, but it's not something that I realize when I'm making characters. For her other kit, she has a relay visor, which is a fairly complicated piece of equipment, but in the context of this game, with the indirect skill, it means she will be able to shoot at anything that Recon can see, because Recon has the relay itself and she's got the visor. And then she has the explosive trait. So explosive is a single-use weapon that is going to, have a big explosion that causes an awful lot of damage. Explosives in this game do not mess around, but you can only use them like once. So yeah, that's Nomad. At a high level, I think the idea is that Recon's going to go in, he's going to target people, he's going to let Nomad then drop missiles on their head, and then Cap is going to be available in case we need to do any sneaking or stuff like that. Team introduced, let's go ahead and talk about our mission. So here is the setup. This is an objective room map from Infinity, and so what that means is that there's basically this box in the middle, and there are doors here, 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 and here, which have to be open. I've set up the opposition force, and they're kind of spread out all over the place, but the key thing is that there are some of them who are inside, and then there's an awful lot that are kind of bunched around this side, and a little bit bunched around on this side, with I think only a boss over here. One thing you don't see, because I haven't quite placed it yet, is there's also supposed to be an objective in the middle. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get somebody in there, get to the objective, pass an acuity roll, and then figure out where we have to leave, and then leave from an exit. Now, strictly speaking, I should already have deployed my heroes. However, in Horizon War Zero Dark, almost every mission gives you the opportunity to run down the clock a little bit in order to choose a better deployment position. If you do this before rolling for the enemy's deployment, then really all you're doing is looking at the table which you just set up and making a decision. On the other hand, if you do it after the enemy deploys, it feels to be more dramatic, like your heroes are running down the clock in order to get into a better position. So when I play, I make the decision after the enemy has deployed whether I want to run down the clock. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. What makes a much bigger difference, though, is that when I'm playing on a 2-foot by 4-foot table like this, I also run down the clock substantially to represent the fact that we are simply playing on a smaller board. A smaller board means you'll need fewer activations to get the mission done, and so I have found that if I want to keep the pressure up, I need to run down the clock. By the way, what run down the clock means is you take cards from the deck of enemy activations and you just flip them over. You don't resolve them or anything like that, you just lose those turns. Another thing I do is that if I draw a joker, I will resolve that complication, and then I'll put the joker back into the deck. It's not rules as written, it's just kind of fun, and it makes it so that choosing to run down the clock can always feel a little bit stressful. Speaking of rules as written, each mission does have a condition in place that tells you what to do if you're playing on a table that's smaller than 4 foot by 4 foot. For this mission, that rule is that you start with a complication. The reason I'm not using that rule is that it doesn't actually tell me how much smaller of a table I should be playing on. It just says play on a smaller table. And in my opinion, Playing on a 2 foot by 2 foot table will be different than 2 foot by 4 foot, which is different than 3 foot by 3 foot. So based on my experience playing the game, I find 2 foot by 4 foot, I run down the clock by the amounts that I've said, and that's what's working for me. Doesn't make a big difference, but it's kind of fun. Anyway, with all that said and done, I have set up with the following deployment. You have Cap over here, who happens to be in line of fire of these two people. The distance means he's not likely to get hurt, but it will be kind of nice to have him standing there, soaking up whatever fire they choose to throw at him. He's not actually the toughest in my group, but I don't know, I suppose I didn't realize that when I was setting him up. I kind of thought that he'd be a nice little tank. Over here, you have the indirect firing missile launcher Nomad, and this is definitely my Infinity experience coming through, where you have your indirect attack missile bot hiding in the corner where no one can see, and then Recon is deployed right here. He's going to be the guy that's doing all the work, so I'm putting him up front. This then is a bit of a closer view of some of the opposition. My deployment is right over there, and as you can see, there really is just not much going on in this whole side of things. And so what I'm thinking is that if I can get somebody up here, and that someone is going to be Recon, maybe I can get in, open a door, maybe this door, kill this guy, grab the objective, and get out of there before anything else happens. I'll tell you right now, it's not going to work out that way, but that's the idea. Okay, so looking at this, I'm going to make my first move, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Recon use his free triple movement to just dash right up in here. He will be able to end up in this position. There is a grunt here. They're not that dangerous. There's an elite over there. They are a little bit dangerous, but I'm kind of hoping that it's not going to be a big deal. And then over here is a boss. The boss is kind of dangerous, but to remind you of the rules slightly, at the end of each of your heroes activations, you draw a card from the deck. The number tells you what type of trooper activates. The suit tells you what type of action they take. And bosses only happen if you draw an ace, which means it's not super likely that the boss is going to trigger. So my thinking here is that if I can dash in, it'll be really safe. And this is what it looks like. Of course, getting here is perfectly safe. There's no dice to roll, but after that, I have to draw a card. And the card that I draw is one that is going to activate this grunt. The first part is not so dangerous. I believe he would shoot if he can see someone, but he can't see anyone, so instead he is going to move and get a support token. Then I have to roll the secondary action, and his secondary action is an attack, and that's where things get bloody. In this game, when you attack, you roll a number of d12s equal to your skill, plus 1 for each support token that you spend. Bad guys will always just spend their support tokens immediately. Heroes can hold on to them. But in this case, the bad guy just got a support token, so he can spend it. The next thing you want to do is form up groups of dice that are equal to or higher than the difficulty. Each of those is going to be a hit. And that difficulty is informed by a number of factors, but chief amongst which is how close you are to your target. As we can see here, we are very, very close. And so what that means is that it's pretty straightforward for the enemy to potentially deal an awful lot of damage, especially if they get lucky. And indeed, that's exactly what happens. My enemy gets lucky. I think they might even roll some lucky 12 crits. My armor is not effective at stopping it, and all of a sudden, Recon goes from having no wounds to 4 wounds. And this is a big, big oof. Having 4 wounds means that this guy is basically unable to do anything until he gets help. He's a hero, so he's not dead, but with 4 wounds, he can't do much else. Moreover, remember, this is the guy who has the highest acuity. Acuity is the skill you use to medic people, and he's the one that's taken out, so that's going to be a problem. And while part of this was bad luck, part of it is also, I have only myself to blame. I've played this a lot. I know that one thing that you should do is that before you put your heroes in dangerous situations, you should make sure they have a support token. Support tokens can be used for a whole bunch of things. One of the key things that you use your support tokens for as a hero is soaking up damage. You spend a support token before you take a wound, and it cancels out that wound. I didn't do that. The second thing I should have realized is that just being this close to the opposition is a recipe for getting hurt pretty badly. The third thing I want to mention is that this wasn't just one activation. I think there was one activation where the guy came around the corner, then I think I tried to spotlight him, and I think I probably did target him, but didn't get enough successes to have a bonus action to then finish him off with Nomad, and that's when the second activation was drawn, which got me targeted and in the bad situation. The reason I bring all this up is because there were actually many places where I could have done something differently, and I didn't. It's not just one activation that went really, really badly. It was like 2 stacked on top of each other, the last of which went really badly. But we're not out of the game yet, so we'll just have to figure out what to do next. I didn't take too many screenshots between then and now, but here is kind of halfway through my response. As you can see, the first thing that happened is Nomad went around from there to here. You can see that she got targeted. That was a consequence of some of the activations that happened. But for the most part, she has been using cautious moves in order to get here. The reason to use cautious moves is because they cancel the primary activation of your enemy. They still have the secondary action, which is that D12 roll, and secondary actions can be dangerous. Just ask poor Recon over here. But the cautious move will cancel the primary activation, and that can be useful. The other thing that happens with a cautious move is if you get a lot of successes, you can use those for bonus actions. Bonus actions can be things like shooting the enemy, and they can be things like giving yourself support tokens. And in this case, I really wanted to give a support token to Recon over here so that he doesn't die if he takes another wound. Heroes die on the 5th wound, so I really need to make sure that doesn't happen. The other thing to notice is that we've moved ourselves a little bit further up. The guy over here is dead. Remember, she can see whatever Recon can see, and then she can shoot it because of the relay visor. And I think we cleared out one other one over here. We are continuing to move up to here. I had to get the targeted off of her because targeted is really brutal. And unfortunately, one of the things that I'm realizing is I haven't taken an EWAP, Electronic Warfare Operator. And EWAPs are the best way to clear targeted off of your own guys. I don't get to do that because I don't have one, and so I have to be a little cagey here. If my dudes had higher armor, I could maybe try to rely on that armor in order to tank hits and clear targeted from getting shot at. When you're shot, the targeted condition goes away, but I'm pretty low level here, so I only have armor 2. That's not really going to be an option. Fortunately, there are still some grunts around, and they are going to be moving towards me. In this case, one has gone in that direction. One other thing I did decide as my own little house rule here is that in this sequence, it is possible, and indeed I think rules as written, some of the guys who would activate would just walk over to this guy who is heavily injured and just murder him. And I kind of decided that if there are grunts and bogeys who can see an active enemy, then instead of just going to murder the guy that's on the ground, they would shoot at the active hero. That's not rules as written, and I think that probably did help me out a little bit because, this guy's pretty close to death, and having him die would be bad. But it's something that I decided, and I don't know, it kind of makes sense to me. Once we get to this situation, the next challenge is figuring out how to deal with that boss, because if and when he activates, it could be bad for me. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to get this person up here, and I'm going to need to try to medic my own guy. In order to medic, you need to make an acuity roll. You need to get a 13 or higher. My acuity is 2, so I am just not going to succeed on 2 dice. It's possible, but it's a really dangerous thing to just be standing there. If I use a support token, I can get an extra die. That's 3 dice. It might succeed. And if I get enough successes, then eventually Recon can start healing himself. However, standing there, bleeding myself of support tokens just seems like a recipe for getting shot again with an enemy boss right over there. So I want to take out that boss. Here I'm checking line of fire, actually, and as you can see, there is not a line of fire. But when we get to this position, there is a line of fire. In fact, as you can see, the enemy has in fact moved over to this position, and poor Octavia has been targeted again. Now, taking out a boss in this game can actually be kind of tricky. Bosses have 3 wounds, and what that means is that you need to get at least 3 hits in order to affect them at all. Moreover, with a defense of 3, the target number for hitting bosses is kind of high. So for Octavia here, it may be tricky in order to take this guy out. The plan had been for Recon over here to target such enemies, which makes it easier to hit them and thus generate more successes, but Recon's out of action, so that's not going to work. Fortunately, activations for bosses are kind of rare, so essentially what's going to happen is I spend some time. I think I kill this guy. I think this guy activates and comes in and opens the door, but doesn't do anything else, and throughout that process I am able to eliminate this guy. The only other thing that happens between the previous screenshot and now is that I managed to cure this guy enough that he can take care of myself, and through that process, another enemy boss, which had spawned earlier, runs around to this position. I'm fortunate that the boss hasn't had a chance to attack, but he's got multiple support tokens and really is going to be a big deal. To deal with him, I decide to use my one single-use explosive weapon. Explosives, as I've mentioned, are really dangerous. Basically, you shoot, any hits you get make the blast even bigger, and it starts off pretty big, and then you take a whole bunch of damage based on how close you are to the initial blast. The boss here in the middle is entirely toast by the explosion, but this guy and this guy also get exploded, and you can actually see that this guy way over here, Recon, is mildly affected. I think because he's far enough away and in enough cover that he isn't actually going to get hurt by the explosion, but it is pretty funny that the big old rocket launcher that I used to kill everybody maybe even could have hurt Recon. But it doesn't, and with all of them taken out, the majority of the action is now on this side of the room, this over here. So Recon is back to feeling spry in his own self. Octavia has been targeted again. Remember, it's a real pain to get rid of targeted, and it happens every time you draw diamonds. Recon's the objective grabber, so in he goes. I know that he technically shouldn't be able to fit through those doors, but the cylinder size for Horizon Zero Dark motorcycles are different from the cylinder size for motorcycles in Infinity, so I just kind of let myself have it. And anyway, as things proceed, things are pretty good. Where we're at right now is a space where activations are not likely to have catastrophic negative consequences, and this is a good chance to do things like accomplishing missions. One of the things I really like about Horizon War Zero Dark is that the enemy activations, you have some knowledge of what can happen, but it can also be kind of random. So you often have to look for a good moment and try to do the objective in those safe moments, but no moment is perfectly safe, so you also have to still be careful. And indeed, one thing that's happened here is that Octavia got targeted, she got shot, she got unlucky, she took a wound, but because I had the support token, it's only one wound, and one wound isn't super bad. Having got the objective, I then draw a card to see which side of the map I have to get off on, and it is the one over there. This is a little lucky for me because this map edge is kind of close. If I had drawn the map edge up there, it might have been better because there aren't that many enemies over there, but it would have been worse because I have to get Recon and Nomad, and remember, Cap's all the way over there. I'd have to get all three of them off that edge. So this one over here is A-OK. One thing that's less A-OK is that I drew a complication which spawns a defense mech, and because I am using Operation Nemesis rules, I rolled, and this actually was upgraded to a combat mech. Combat mechs are incredibly dangerous, and I essentially have no chance of even killing this. Remember when I was complaining about how bosses have 3 wounds? Well, combat mechs have even more. I think they have 4 of them, and their defense stat is even higher. So tussling with this guy is just not in the cards. I need to kite/avoid him as best I can, and I mean, that's going to turn this mission in a completely different direction. Step 1 is getting Recon off the board. So this is an older screenshot. It didn't feature the combat mech right there, but what's going to happen is I'm going to take Recon, and I'm going to use his extra fast movement in order to put him in places where the nearest enemy to him can't actually shoot at him. This should make things relatively safe, and because he's got so much speed, he can actually pull that off. He's going to start by running all the way over here, then he's going to run over behind this thing, and then he's going to get off the board. So even if the enemy draws violent shooty activations, they won't be able to shoot him because he's hidden from them. At least that's the idea. If they get really unlucky for me, it is possible that they could move first into a spot where they see him and then shoot him. But if I'm doing my job, even that shouldn't be super likely. And I do my job, and there he is. Next step is getting Nomad out of there, and that's going to be harder because, as you can see, the mech is coming for her. And this is, once again, a really tricky spot. The mech is actually faster than she is, so if she activates and it activates, then it's going to chase after her. What I decide to do is I take her, and I run her straight up into this grunt, because grunts and mechs activate on the same cards, so as long as she's closer to the grunt activates rather than the mech. That grunt could run straight into her, and melee combat in this game is absolutely brutal, so there is a risk of that, but I think it's safer than having to tussle with the mech. And indeed, things are fairly lucky. I managed to get all the way from there to here before enough activations of the grunt happen where it catches up to me. And even though it does run into melee with me, all it manages to do is to take out my support token, so I don't even take any additional wounds. After that, it's basically just having Nomad, cautious move. Throughout this process, as you can see, this elite is kind of chasing after me, but I'm doing my best in order to stay away from it, and then I will be able to get to safety. I actually do mess around a little bit over here before getting to safety, though, because I want to get some more grunt activations in order to pull the defense mech in this direction. Cap is all the way over here, and he still has to get off the board. So if I can pull the mech all the way over here, then Cap will have an easier time of it, and an easier time of it he has. He has started over here, but then he quickly goes to there, then there, and he's out. The mech, as you can see, has gotten a little closer, but no problem, easy peasy. The only thing left to do is to award experience. Now, unfortunately, experience is one of the more, let's say, disorganized parts of this game. In Zero Dark, the core rulebook, so not Operation Nemesis, the missions themselves give you a tiny bit of experience, but most of your experience comes from achievements and from experience you get from complications. And I have found that these achievements, and especially the experience for complications, incentivizes you to kind of sit there twiddling your thumbs for a while in a way that can be tedious and also can be prone to really random outcomes that aren't super fun. So I'm not enamored with those. Now, the good news is that the actual place where experience matters is in the 12-mission campaign of Operation Nemesis. And in Operation Nemesis, the missions and the rules for the titular Nemesis itself will give you plenty of experience. However, in this 3-mission Operation Gemini that I'm running through, I don't love the experience options. The good news is I'm not going to have a lot of chances to spend that experience anyway, so it doesn't really matter. What I'm going to do here is I'm giving myself experience for the mission, I'm giving myself experience for the achievements, but I'm not taking experience for the complications because I don't like the way that incentivizes me to play, and it's not really going to matter because I'm just doing 3 missions. And as it would happen, I do manage to scrape up enough experience for a supply drop, which is a random upgrade, and the supply drop upgrade I get is an advanced IFF, so that's an advanced identifier of friend or foe. This piece of equipment is a really cool idea. You can run up to a dead enemy and steal their transponder, so you start giving off data signatures that you look like them, but it's not actually going to affect the campaign, so I won't say too much more about it. And speaking of not saying too much more, I think this is a good place to wrap up this mission report. We have grabbed the data. The next step is to go to Mission 2, the Heist, where we have to rob a bank vault as part of Operation Gemini. Till then, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you around.